Welcome to EXP CultureCast, EXP Realty's official diversity, equity, and inclusion podcast. I'm your host, Cody Gilkison, the visionary leader behind EXP's DEI strategy. I believe that we all have a story to tell, and that's where this show really shines. We are a vibrant tapestry of diverse backgrounds and experiences, and that's our superpower. In each episode, we'll sit down with thought leaders, industry experts, and change makers who are driving meaningful conversations and actions in the realms of diversity, equity, and inclusion. From personal stories of triumph to deep dives into systemic challenges, CultureCast is your compass in navigating the complex landscape of DEI. This is CultureCast, the bi-weekly podcast about what makes us us. Hey everybody, and welcome back. We're deep into season 2 of EXP CultureCast, and I have been talking about this for 3 episodes now, but we are finally here. I have the guest of guests. I've got the one and only Leo Pareja, our CEO of EXP Realty, here with us today. Hi, Leo.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
It's so cool. I'm really thrilled that we're here. We're talking a little bit about Hispanic Heritage Month. But mostly, as we started on the last episode, if you guys missed that one, we gave the programming note that we've shifted the tone of this podcast to be less about a topic and more about a person. So we're here to talk about Leo today. And first off, I just want to plug your newly rebranded podcast, newly relaunched podcast, Real Estate Success Stories. I watched the first episode today, and it was just excellent with Gary Acosta, and it really gets into a lot of your philosophy. And you guys have a brand new second episode out with our very own my partner in crime, Jessica Nieto, is on. So you guys go check it out. It's available on all the podcast platforms. So Leo, do you want to start by giving a little bit of an intro into you and where you come from and what led you here?
Yeah, sure. And again, being the podcast we're on, I'll actually give you guys a little bit more color that some people may or may not know. So I was actually born in Latin America. I grew up in 6 different South American countries. I didn't actually move to the States till I was 12 years old. And it was super interesting because my father did NGO work for the federal government. So I always grew up as an embassy kid. And in the States, overseas, I was always an American to them. And then I moved to the States at 12 years old, did middle school, high school, college, and lived the rest of my life in the DC area until I moved to Miami. But when I got to the States, I wasn't also welcomed as an American. I was called other names in the 90s. And it was really until I moved to Miami that I've actually really felt at home, because Miami, in my opinion, is the capital of South America. And it's, this melting pot of English and Spanish and cultural nuances that, in my life experience, that's the first place I've ever truly felt at home. But if you're asking professionally, I got licensed in 19. I went on to sell lots of houses over a 16-year period. In that journey, I became the number 1 KW agent in the world. I also started a hard money lending business, and then most recently a software company before I made my way over to EXP to become the CEO. That's the super short version, but I can jump into any expanded version of that you want to, Cody.
That's fantastic. I want to, let's start young. You started your real estate career at the age of 19 in a field that's often dominated by more experienced professionals. How did your background and your cultural identity shape your approach to breaking into the industry, and what kind of challenges did you face in those early days?
Yeah, so one philosophy I prescribe to is that you should always play the hand that you're dealt to the most of your advantage. And being young is not an advantage in real estate. But my early real estate kind of success was actually super focused on the Latino community. So I became the trainer at the Hispanic Committee of Virginia. That was a nonprofit that helped with all kinds of issues from immigration to language, and they had a first-time home buying program, and I taught it, and that's actually where all my first customers came from. I then started working with the World Bank and the IDB. So there was a lot of folks relocating from South America who needed rentals, and most people didn't want to help them with rentals. But what they didn't realize is these were high-level executives who in 2-3 years would buy, luxury properties. So my Latino identity is extremely important to me, and it's, you know, kind of a prevailing theme in a lot of my professional stuff that I've done. And again, when I speak about mindset, I actually tell people, and again, this is not just about, you know, the racial identity, but also just where you're at in life, right? When I speak to agents, I say to them all the time, I'm like, hey, that little voice inside of your head when you're getting started, whether you're too young, you're too old, you're too this, you're too that, is normally a program that comes from your childhood that holds you back. But the reality is, like, any moment in time in your career is actually an advantage if you just own it, right? So for example, I was a solo agent at one point that didn't have much business. And when I went on a listing appointment or a buyer a consultation, I would say, hey, the advantage of working with me is I'm all yours. Like I'm available 24/7.
Right.
You know, you want me to hold your house open? I'll be here Monday through Friday, Saturday and Sunday, because you're my only customer right now. Right. And then as I progressed and became a mega team leader and a very large producing agent, then I said, hey, there's leverage, professional services, blah, 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 blah. But like, I've never let any station in life not be an advantage. And the one thing, you know, we'll probably talk about a little later is my journey with NARP and stuff. I never actually positioned anything as like, hey, I deserve a seat at the table. It's more like, hey, you're missing out if you don't actually capitalize on this growing opportunity. Right. So I think framing and how you look at things and how you approach things, it kind of makes all the difference.
That's fantastic. I love that. And moving through your career, by the time you're 28, you've become one of the top agents globally for KW. How do you think your achievements as a Latino leader in real estate impacted the representation of minorities in our industry?
No, that's a good question. I was always super clear in my head that I didn't want to be the number one Latino that did anything. I wanted to be the number one person that did something and happened to be Latino. And that was very, very, very clear to me. And again, and you referenced the podcast with Gary, he actually on purpose was seeking people like me out in the sense of like had achieved very high levels and so happened to be, you know, Latino and proud of his heritage. And, you know, I speak Spanish and I'm like, I've been on CNN Latino for Latino issues for NARP. So it was important to him. And again, it's where our journeys have overlapped to me that I just wanted to be the best that happened to be. I didn't actually want to be the other way around because I think that's how we lift up communities. Right. So, I may or may not have touched that on that podcast, but I did some consulting for a publicly traded company once upon a time. And they said, how do we attract Latino talent? And I said, hey guys, I'll make this a 7-minute phone call because there was a bunch of little Zoom calls. I said, every one of these Zoom boxes looks the same. If you want to attract Latinos, the easiest thing to do is hire someone that looks and sounds like me, right? Because representation matters and visibility matters. And I know every time I got an award, whether I was number one in the world for Keller or I started a software company or even this role, like I've had agents come up to me. I've had, you know, I spoke at Mike Del Preti's class in Boulder recently, and students came up to me. Like, it matters, right? Seeing someone who sounds like you, has a similar shared story as you, just makes it like I can do it too, right? And it doesn't even have to be said. It happens at the subconscious level. And so I know that my journey has also been impactful for other folks who are coming behind me.
That's beautiful. I love that. And a bit on the episode with Acosta was you guys really dug into DEI and how, you know, it's seen as this sort of pervasive, people are getting jobs that they don't deserve type thing. But I love the way that it's broken down as I'm a top candidate and also I have this additional thing is a great way that it was framed. I really enjoyed that. And I feel that way in my career that EXP chose me because I was the right choice for the DEI position. But being a queer person also gives me a window where now queer agents feel really free to come to me with whatever they've got and know that they've got an ear from corporate.
Well, I'll give. I may have touched on the podcast or may not, so I apologize if I'm repeating it here. But like one of the things that when I became NARP's national president, I actually told Gary I was not going to sit on any just straight up diversity panels where it was, you know, one of each group. I said, I want to be sitting on the CEO panels. I want to be sitting on the top producer panels, speaking about how to do the business better and how to be better. Because I believe that's the more proper way to actually have an impact and create the awareness, just by being yourself and the best version of yourself at your craft.
Mhm. That's wonderful. I love that. So I want to talk about Washington Capital Partners a little bit. So when you co-founded that, you entered an industry where minority representation is really scarce. How did you ensure that cultural equity was part of the business model in that space,
No,
particularly in a space that's traditionally
yeah,
lacking that?
my co-founders were all of color, so
There you go.
it's just pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Again, for good or bad, I feel like I've just never really seen it as a limitation. So
Mhm.
I would say for good, because I just assume that I'm allowed to participate at the highest level, and I've just never, even if a door is closed, I just make the assumption, I need to refine my sales pitch. I need to get a better business model, refine the business model. And uh, I don't know if you have it as one of the questions, but going on to my next business, the one where we ended up raising $48 million in venture capital and growth equity, that was actually one of the best experiences I had from the minority lens, because
Mhm.
in my opinion, that was the purest form of capital. I felt those people really only cared about total addressable market, customer acquisition cost, gross margin. And it was the purest form of, hey, I don't care what you look like. Are you a good operator with a good business? And I think, again, that was being a Latino founder who raised that level of capital and had an exit puts me into a very, very small club. But interestingly enough, when you look at statistics, like Latinos form businesses, small businesses, higher than any other group in America right now. But they also don't break through the barrier of $100 million in gross revenue per year. So it stays a very small business. And and again, having gone through and kind of experienced all the levels of solo practitioner, self-employed, to small business owner, to building business bigger, more than the SMB cutoff is normally $1 to $5 million, growing much bigger enterprises, and now even running this business. I think a lot of it, the opportunity is there. It's either lack of access to the information, and not like there's gatekeeping. It's more in the fact of, like, again, I can only speak to my experience of being Latino. We're a relatively young demographic in the sense of we haven't been here for 3 generations, right? So um, I feel like I'll get to be that elder statesman and be able to answer these questions if people reach out and say, hey, no, you don't, there's an easier way. Like, you just need to create it this way. There's access to capital. And so, and maybe it's the optimist in me, that it's less about not being invited. It's just not knowing there's a party, right? And
Mhm.
and if you have value to give into the capitalist system, in my unique experience, they'll let you right in. And it's all about just being prepared, right? Like, um, in my journey to raise capital, I met with Sequoia and, Excel and like Founders Fund and like the most marquee capital, allocators on the planet. And the cool part was, you still have the same imposter syndrome that you have at every phase of life. But when you come prepared and you know your stuff and you're a domain expert,
Mhm.
and you kind of get this body language and like good questions, and they're not checking their phone, you walk out going, yeah, I'm good enough. It's just, I just didn't know the rules of the game, right? So even with the NAR shift that I've been very loud about, I say to everybody, to me, life is just understanding the rules of the game, and then I'll win. I just need to understand all the rules. And I think for folks who, are part of groups that have been traditionally marginalized, it's access to even the rules of the game. But if you can understand the rules of the game, in my personal experience, which I understand is unique, and I have my own, things that make me unique and different. Um, I don't think I've ever had a door closed on me because of an opportunity I wanted to pursue. I just recalibrated and went at it a different way.
There's so many. I'm struggling to keep up. There's so many nuggets of wisdom here. I'm a quote guy, and I'll make quotes out of people that come on this podcast. And there's you're giving us. I don't know if you realize how many nuggets of wisdom you dropped in that one paragraph. So that it's so cool. Anyway, I want to move on and talk about NAREP. So you've played a significant role in NAREP. If folks don't know, that's the National Association of Hispanic
Hispanic
Real
real
Estate
estate
Professionals.
professionals.
That's it.
Yeah, because it's
And
all encompassing of mortgage, title, and realtors.
it's all that. So, advocating for Hispanic professionals and underserved communities, how have you seen the real estate industry evolve for Hispanic professionals, and what do you think are the challenges that still remain for Latinos aspiring to succeed?
Yeah, so NAREP is like an intricate part of my story, and for anyone who wants the hour version, go listen to that podcast with Gary. But what I think Gary Acosta nailed better than any other organization I've seen is that he positioned the as an opportunity to capitalize on an eventuality, right?
Mm.
And I'm a data nerd, and so he first of all positioned as a business organization and was really data centric. He put out these Hispanic wealth reports. He put out the Hispanic report every year on demographic growth, consumption of real estate, and everything else, and just like the birth rates, right? Like I actually like to talk about, I've been accused of having a crystal ball. I don't, but I'm really good at looking at data, and there are things in data that are eventualities, right? Birth and death rates, household formation. Latinos are just the leader period in the United States, hands down. Just look at the census every time it's put out. And so you can look and say, hey, over the next 20 years, Latinos are going to be a bigger portion of the population, which translates directly to buy more homes, right? So he always positioned the organization as a business opportunity. And, whether it was publicly traded companies, it's like, hey, your leadership, your talent pool needs to be reflective of the community you're going to go after. And I think that was the success of it. And a lot of it was advocacy based. So, in my journey, it taught me a lot about what citizen lobbying is, which is a concept that was new to me, where we actually went to the Hill and presented, bills that were, actively being discussed and how it affected it. So like I had a unique vantage point of the housing market during the financial crisis because I happened to live in DC, and there was many times that Gary couldn't get to a meeting soon enough because it was like the next day or short notice. And I talk about it in that podcast where I was actually in the Eisenhower offices at the White House for like CFPB and Dodd-Frank, and were being discussed. I was in the comptroller currency office sitting next to the director of HF, and I was in my late 20s. So my Latino experience, I think, has given me a unique opportunity and vantage point that I frankly wouldn't have had if I was not involved with organizations like that who had a legitimate seat at the table. Not from, hey, I deserve a seat. It was purely from, hey, you guys make up 21% of the population and we need the input. So we create products. And, I sat in all kinds of interesting meetings, from how credit scoring is modeled and how minority communities, don't like banks because they don't trust them because they probably fled a country that, nationalized and seized all their stuff. And so, there's cash deposits and receipts, and how underwriting guidelines to credit scoring need to be nuanced because, they have the ability to pay, which is the most important ingredient in underwriting. But maybe they don't have the behavior that was modeled for folks that, are monolithic and not part of this emerging group. And so I had a really cool vantage point in seeing how much impact a well-educated voice delivering to the right audience. And it was super empowering to know that, I've seen my minority status as a superpower, right? And something I've been able to use to grow faster and learn better. And I know I've gotten opportunities that I was qualified for, Cody. So very important in that I was the best at my craft, full stop, before we started the conversation. But oh, by the way, I also have this perspective. And that's what I talked about on that call about DEI. I think DEI is about the fact that if you have a complete monolithic group, they just miss out on life experiences they may not be familiar with, or a view of the world that's just not part of their world. And I don't actually think it's wrong. It's just it's just absent of different perspective. And when you have a well-rounded group of human beings, you can actually draw from different points of view and life experiences that some folks, if it was just one large group, they wouldn't have. And so I think you're missing out on economic opportunity, right? You're missing out on expanding your business model and expanding your pie, because there's just folks that you just don't know how to serve or how to speak to them correctly. The amount of times I've been on a call, especially early on, like doing consulting, where it's like, hey, we're going into the Latino market and everything's just translated on like, first of all, like, I speak English really well. I speak Spanish really well. Like, if you're targeting me on financial services, I actually want to read it in English. It's the language I feel dominant in, right? So translating it, you're actually missing me as a customer. But if it's nuanced and it's in culture, which to me is different than in language, because I'm first generation. I didn't get here till I was 12, but like the vast majority of Latinos in this country are not. I not only say they're bilingual, they're bicultural, right? So good in culture branding is kind of like the spice versus the full translation, and kind of the familiarity. Maybe it's a little bit of in language and a little bit of flavor with it. That just makes it, it makes me feel that the person creating it actually knows how I feel, right? And that's a big nuance. And again, I'm very capitalist, and I always approach it from the business first perspective. And so, I talk about a sample size of one. I've made posts about it, and I talk about it on stages, where I don't think we give ourselves enough credit as a consumer and as an educated and avid buyer. Because a lot of times I see agents or business people going, I'm going to try this, I'm going to try that. And I'm like, does that work on you, Cody? Like, when's the last time you consumed a product or service in that way? And I ask you, no matter what role you have, it's like, how do you consume products? What makes a buying decision? What made you feel like seen, included, happy, whatever word you want to do? It's like, how did I capture that moment that either made you say yes or, made you come back?
That's brilliant. I love that. One of the things I want to get to next is when you became the CEO, I did my little bit of research so I'd know what kind of guy was steering the ship, right? And I made a note that if you ever got on the podcast, we had to talk about the Pareja Family Foundation. And this foundation, for those that aren't aware, provides scholarships for disadvantaged women and minorities and helps them enter the tech industry with fantastic initiatives like tech boot camps. Can you just share a story about how your foundation has changed someone's life or what impact?
Well, so I'll go back to like how I look at giving, right? So I got started in the business really young, and I thought, I always said to myself, I'll give when I have more or I have more. And more was time or money or fill in the blank, right? It was always this when I get there. And then the financial crisis happened and I lost everything. And then I became hyper aware that tomorrow's never promised. And so my wife and I actually both became mentors with Big Brothers Big Sisters when we started dating. It was actually when she found out and I found out that we both wanted to do it. I was like, all right, this is my human. And what that taught us was that helping, it doesn't need much money, and it just needs some time. And we both prescribe to a theory that concentrated giving is better, right? Like, rather than donating to a bunch of different causes, it's like, look, spend time with one kid, with one person, with one individual that you can impart your life experience on. That's actually more impactful than most checks you can write. And so, as we matured, we said we're going to set up a foundation. And what we found going through tech and being 7 years in it, like I told you, actually, my vantage point is that it's actually super inclusive and the opportunity is huge, but it's lack of entry point, right? So the world's gone through a massive shift, I think, in the last 10 years, that we no longer check for college degrees, right? Like, I have an art degree, for God's sakes, right?
Musical theater, yeah.
And so, like, that has nothing to do with selling real estate. Right. But, it was web design, and I eventually built tech, so it came full circle. But like, the fact that we found that there was these emerging roles in tech that required no college education, and you could be making a meaningful amount more money. We wanted to create an access to that, and we have several examples of young women who single mothers or otherwise, who were, earning somewhere between 35 to 45K in service level jobs that had no upward mobility. We put them through an upskilling boot camp, and we've gotten several as high as much as $80 to $120,000 after a 6-month boot camp, because as a technology moves quickly and emerges quickly, we see that there's new roles that are created that don't need a programming job. I will say that just even the evolution of large language models, even some of those roles that we saw created have now had their cheese moved, if you will. But we've always prescribed to this theory. It's like, look, instead of just giving money to a bunch of different people, it's like, how can we impact the specific life of one person in a meaningful way? Just because of personal experience and how we saw it move the needle.
That's awesome. All right. So we've moved through all of this, and now we're at your CEO role here at EXP Realty. As we're going to tie this into the DEI bit, but as your CEO of EXP Realty, what role do you think DEI plays in your leadership strategy, and particularly how we better serve minority and underserved agents and clients?
So, again, my vantage point is my vantage point as someone who's always kind of been hyper aware of this just from life experience. And what I say about DEI, and to me, it's more of a philosophy of just having a company or an organization that's reflective of the communities you serve. Whether if we were to say, this is the breakdown of men, women, whatever identities, race, ethnicity, all that stuff. And if you had an organization that was somewhat equitable to the macro numbers, I think you end up having a more rich experience from both an understanding of how, different groups view the world, and it's better economically. Like, it is a better mousetrap for capitalism because you're not missing, an important buying group, an important customer group. So again, being a minority, I think I just approach it completely different, of the sense of like, why wouldn't I want that opinion? Because I have a slightly different perspective and opinion that probably isn't always heard. And so it's not like a to-do list for me. It's just my operating model, right? I think there's probably been a noticeable difference in the amount of women I've put in leadership.
Right.
But to me, it's like, what percentage of women are in our industry? Our leadership should be as reflective of the fact that close to 60 or 70% of women or realtors are women, right? So it's that's
so real. At the WIN conference, those numbers that Betsy Myers provided about the buying power and the effect of women on the real estate.
I'm just talking even just on the staff side, right? And it's not like, this is the distinction I want everyone to hear. It's not like, oh, I need to because I think one of the biggest arguments against it, and again, this is me talking to publicly traded companies for the last 20 years, or like when I said, hey, hire someone that looks like me, and they're like, we'd love to, but we just don't have any candidates. Right. And again, and I genuinely mean this. I don't think anyone's doing it on purpose. It's just echo chambers of monolithic groups, right? If you guys all look the same, and again, I'm filling in the blank for any large group, you naturally won't have a deep bench of other folks. And so the way I've always approached it is especially like real estate, I think there's absolutely no reason the excuse to not have a deep bench of powerful women leaders, because the industry's composed of strong, powerful women, right? So it didn't take me very long to fill out the top senior leadership with powerful women, because they were all around us. But again, I'm saying it as a perspective, and again, to me, it's a gift and an advantage that I've had this different point of view. So to me, it's like, I don't have a DEI strategy. I just have a strategy of making sure that the team is reflective of the communities we serve and are built of. So maybe it's just in my head, but I think it's a clear distinction and point of view.
Yeah. And we'll touch on it a little bit later when we talk about OneEXP. But I think, you mentioned earlier about being able to tap into a source of knowledge that knows how to serve a community. And I think that's something really important that OneEXP offers, is the ability to plug in to a group of people who can help you connect with a community that isn't reflective of your own background. And there's also a bit there about the diversity thought proposition as well, where you get people, it has nothing to do with race, religion, sexuality, any of those things that define us, but our upbringing shapes who we are in a way that if you have a room full of people who all come from a relatively the same upbringing, then they're all going to write their long answer in the same way. But if you have people that come at it from all different angles, you might get the same answer, but their long work on paper is different. And there's a lot to learn from that. And that's always been a key part of my leadership strategy leading teams at the different companies that I've worked at, is I try and get people that think differently, right? And I think that is something that EXP has in droves. It's something we've always had. And in the people that have been promoted recently, be it women or not, all the people that I see are people that are attacking stuff from an angle that's different than anybody else on the leadership team. And I love that about our company. Yeah. So let's talk about your future vision. In your role leading EXP Realty, what's your vision for fostering more diverse leadership within the community? And how can real estate as a whole become more inclusive and reflective of the communities that it serves?
So one of the things that I was very aware when I was coming in here was to also understand the legacy of what's been built, because I think it's always important to understand where you came from to know where you're going. And one of my favorite explanations of the company that Glenn said to me was that this is an experiment in distributed leadership, right? If when I think of RevShare and I compare it to other models, it's a new and improved on model of what a franchise would have been, in the sense that I don't have to sign a really long-term contract. I don't have to sign a very long-term lease. And like, it's an aligned partnership in the way the revenue comes in. And so what I've seen and found here is that we have very committed and invested leaders who, aren't necessarily staff, but they're the agent leaders, because the economic model structured a really close partnership where the incentive is there. So why I say that is because our model attracts all types of humans, and that's the beauty of it. And so in turn, it creates and fosters, and we get to showcase all types of different diverse leaders of any and all walks of life. So, I describe EXP in a very small sentence, but every word's chosen on purpose, which is we're a platform that allows real estate entrepreneurs to build whatever size dream they want. And we serve multiple avatars just from the transactional side of, I'm aware that 60 to 70% of our agents are probably solo producers that do 5 to 10 deals. And that's awesome. When we also are super proud of our top 250 teams that are the most productive teams in the country. And so one of the value propositions, because I'm very growth focused, and like I'm the one doing the very last closing recruiting calls on these mega powerful teams. And I actually explained that our One EXP network is a total value proposition for some of these groups, that, maybe there's team members who are part of what is traditionally a monolithic group. And those team members who may identify in one or more groups, any of the categories, with a tribe that gives them this feeling of being seen and included. They might not even get on their team in their local market, in their local geography that may not be that diverse, because that's part of the fabric of the whole country. And so I actually explain and demonstrate how One EXP is such a value proposition to the company, in the sense that I think some of us even just think about it as one agent or a niche or a focus. It's actually like, no, if you're part of a 60-person team in any part of the country that doesn't have the diversity that you are part of, fill in the blank, it actually creates this opportunity to be part of a tribe without switching teams, switching parts of the country that you can connect with. And even if it's not purely business related, it's just being part of a tribe where you feel comfortable and seen.
Yeah. This longtime listeners of the podcast will know that I always ask the same question at the end of every podcast about, if you were new at EXP, what's the first thing you should do? What advice would you give to somebody new at EXP? And 98% of the time, the answer from all of our top producers is find your tribe, right? And that's, I think, One EXP is one of our greatest superpowers, because you can be anywhere. Where I live in little Danville, Illinois, there's no EXP. There's a couple of EXP agents. I take that back. There's a couple that have signs I've seen lately that I've got to go meet with. But you know, from here, I've got a network that is so wide and so deep of people from all different backgrounds. It always astounds me that, you know, when marketing comes to me and they say, "Hey, we've got Cinco de Mayo messaging. Do you have anybody you can run past this and make sure it's culturally appropriate?" Yeah, I can name you 20 people, right? It's easy. It's like that with every single community, from indigenous to the pride community to the disabled community and all the subsets within that. We've got it. And those tribes are there for you to find, and they're very easy to find. So I love that. And I think 1EXP, when you look at it, really speaks to several of EXP's core values, and the promotion and production of 1EXP content really helps us achieve the original vision of the company, you know, in a great way. And yeah, that's why I love what I do.
No, and it shows. I appreciate you.
Thank you. So we're gonna get towards the end here. I want to talk about your advice for the next generation. So we're in Hispanic Heritage Month, and it's all about celebrating culture and inspiring future generations. What words of wisdoms would you share with young Latinos looking to follow in your footsteps and make an impact?
So again, we're a young cohort, and again, I go back and look over the last couple hundred years when you have large, and again, the superpower of the United States is the immigration, the mixing bowl that we are. So one piece of advice, if you find yourself in an area that doesn't have someone that looks like you in leadership, is actually don't be scared to reach out. Like some of my best mentors were, you know, someone who did not look like me at all. But when I reached out and spent some time with them, they said, "You actually remind me of a young version of myself." And they poured into me. And I mean, I have mentors that don't look anything like me who, you know, from a business standpoint, did more than most family members do. Co-signed my loans, walked me into a bank and introduced me to the CEO and literally said, "That's my nephew." So don't be afraid to get outside of your element. And the way that I always did it, it was just through questions and curiosity. Said, "Hey, tell me your story. Tell me how you got from here to there. I want it to be like that one day." And you know, flattering curiosity will get most people to give you some attention. But don't limit yourself. You know, just get over the fact that it doesn't matter if no one like you that looks like you that's done it before, because that's actually how you get to be the first. And that's been a pretty constant you know, part of my journey where I got to be the first. But it was because someone that did not look like me gave me a lot of opportunities.
That's a really good point. Yeah, that really hits home for me, actually. That's what
The amount of times I've had someone in a, you know, part of the country that doesn't have you know, is experiencing a growth of Hispanic agents, and they're in their 50s or 60s, and they're like, "I don't speak Spanish. I don't have any way of identifying." It's like, you don't have to. I said, go find a 25-year-old or a 23-year-old who's completely bilingual and wants to be like you when they grow up. Just pour into them, right? Like there are plenty of young, ambitious folks of any group, of any opportunity you want to go after, that are dying for some mentorship, who would literally give you 80 hours, 100 hours a week if you pour into them and give them an opportunity that probably wouldn't be available to them otherwise.
Oh, God, I love that. I feel like I need to take a minute and let that sink in. That's so good. So, given the scale of your work and your influence, how can leaders like yourself help create more pathways for minority representation in high-level real estate positions and entrepreneurial ventures?
Well, again, I feel like that's just different because I am one. And again, I think I'm the only Latino CEO of a publicly traded company in housing, period, ever. So again, in a way, me getting here is part of the help, right? Because the amount of people who've come up to me and said, "Hey, now I know I can do it too." So just being a leader and stepping into that space is probably the simplest, most impactful thing that most people can do to help others.
That's beautiful. Now, I teased it earlier, but the last question we always ask, if somebody was starting at EXP Realty and they said, Leo, where do I start? What do I do?
Yeah,
What
so
do you
my
tell them?
answer is different. My answer is different. And again, I borrowed it from Glenn because he's just got some really good explanations of the company he built. And what I like to say to people is a sentence he gave me, which is, look, if you take 87,000 agents plus 3,000 or so staff people, we're bigger than the average American city, right? That's probably bigger than Danville, Illinois, if I had to guess.
Yeah.
Right. And so just first let that sink in. And have that analogy go through the whole thing, right? When you move to a new city, look, I expect you to know your home address, maybe the kids' school, and maybe the grocery store. And give yourself some patience and time and realize that you're not going to get to all of it in one day, right? Because, you probably don't need to find out where the, police station is, hopefully not for a while, or the fire department, or, but, we have movie theaters and we have parks and we have, places to congregate. And so sometimes it's like, I always advise agents, first figure out all the structural stuff that you need to sell lots of houses, because that's the number one thing I want you to do when you're here. So make sure that, you know who your brokers are, your tech is, you're all plugged in, you have access to the information, the workplace, you're set up everywhere. And then I would say, absolutely start kind of venturing out into the city and find your community, and tribe's the best word for it. Because tribe and community mean so many different things, right? Like, to me, actually, it would apply, because of my personality, my profile, it would have been, I wanted to find all the other top producers, because I was one. It was like, if I was coming as an agent, like, okay, who are the people focusing on large teams and team leaders and that kind of, that would have been my first tribe. Honestly, probably before finding EXP Latino, because that, as a business person, I'm here to do that. But then obviously, having been a NARP national president, and I'm very, close to the EXP Latino group, and I'm actually leaving tomorrow to speak at NARP. And I'm going to, and again, a testament to what representation matters, I'm going to be on stage with the CEO of Zillow and the CEO of Anywhere Brands. And the conversation track is the future of the real estate industry. And think about that. It's being held at NARP, and I'm a NARP national president. I'm not talking about diversity and inclusion. I am the representation of it with other folks who are leading publicly traded companies.
That is it's so good. I feel like this is an episode that I'm going to watch again and again, just to make sure I mine all the nuggets out of this. Leo, thank you so much for coming and being on my podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you for what you do, Cody. It's really important, and I appreciate you.
Thank you. Well, listen, everybody, we've got more episodes coming in October. Of course, this is our bi-weekly podcast, but right now we're in Hispanic Heritage Month. So I want you to keep your eyes peeled on the EXP Latino page and on the One EXP page for all the great content and experiences that we're going to have coming up for you guys to experience and dig in a little bit into the Hispanic culture during this month. And it's such a great time for you to learn a little bit more about this incredible growing segment. And we've got some great voices that are going to be coming forward during this month to speak and let you know a little bit about their stories as well. As always, this has been the bi-weekly podcast about